All aboard! Welcome to the All Aboard podcast. I am your host, Brandon DeFreitas, here with an early week edition of the pod and with a repeat guest, Jon B. How are you tonight?
What's going on, Brandon? Glad to be back on the pod.
Hey, we're glad to have you. And you know what? You're very host friendly. We're not going for like the Fridays or the Saturdays. Like we could knock this one out early in the week, provide the content, and then I'm, sitting with my feet up on the couch the rest of the week, after work.
Yeah, let's roll. I mean, you accountants are living the life of luxury there with all the work from home business. I'm still making the long trek into Cambridge every day. So, yeah, tonight happened to be open for me. So, figured why not bang out a nice draft recap.
There you go. Well, I can assure you it is not a life of luxury during busy season for us. So, but right now in the fall, it ain't so bad. But definitely appreciate you on here. And like you alluded to, I think what we want to do today is it's been 5 weeks. We want to do a little review of the rookie draft. So again, our league, 10 teams, rookie only draft for a dynasty. We go 3 rounds in this league, and we can have a little discussion about that, what a round 4 would have looked like. But I want to take a review here as like, after the first quarter of the season, approximately, who's looking like it hits, like what are those pick values looking like. We're going to see people trying to trade and sell off soon, like give them an idea of like, all right, well, last draft, the first round was this percent hit, and that's what I, maybe can expect, etc. So hopefully we can give people a little bit background here by going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of this season, I'm sitting pretty here at 0-5. So the draft is all I have right now. So I think this would be a good pod for me to jump in on.
Yeah, I will say Jon was very quick to volunteer for the draft episode. No interest in reviewing the season, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are pretty settled for me at this point. I'm, you know, most likely locked into the lottery at this point. So just got to see where we wind up in terms of a pick.
Yep. Well, is the green, where are you wearing green to represent the tank right now, or is that just, a coincidence?
The tank is officially on, as you saw. I know I sold off a few pieces recently. So.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I have to officially say on the pod last week, I actually said I thought Mark won the trade. A Rashad Penny out for season definitely shifts it. So now I'm like, wow, Jon got away with one there. But unfortunate for Penny, but fortunate for the Stefanskis.
Yeah, you never want to see a player have a season-ending injury, and feel for Mark a little bit as well. You never want serious injury to happen so soon after a big trade like that goes through. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So we're all taking on risk when we make these trades.
Yep. No, it is very true. Well, without further ado, I know the main event, and sitting here again, I'm sorry, we're still on the free Zoom account for the league podcast. Eventually the audience will complain enough to upgrade it. And let's get this going. We should be sharing, Jon, and you should see what is effectively the draft.
Yeah, it looks good on my end.
Okay. So we're up here now. We have the draft board from this summer. Some of the teams, it'll look a little weird. I zoomed in as much as I could, but this is the original draft order along the top. And then when there were trades, you'll see the team that made the pick is down here. So just a little bit weird. And you can see, I'll give our league some credit. Like sometimes I feel like we all are like, oh, wow, there aren't enough trades, or like there's not a lot of movement, but like this tells a different story, Jon. Like almost, I'd say the majority of the picks look like they exchanged hands at some point.
I know. I feel like with the dynasty format, having the kind of the full season of action, the trades can seem a little slow at times. But exactly, I mean, looking at this, yeah, at least half of the picks looks like they exchanged hands at one point or another. So kudos to the league for staying engaged.
Yeah, great job, everyone. Well, without further ado, let's go down the first round here. And I think, Jon, we're gonna talk. It might be a little what's the right word? You know, it's up to our opinion here whether or not a pick is a hit or an incomplete. I think we're gonna limit the incompletes maybe to like the Jamison Williams situations, but try to we have 10 picks around, try to get a number of hits. And I do want to caveat before we go through, if we say your player is not a hit, it's 5 games into their rookie season. We're basing it off of what we've seen today. In no way does it mean that your player is not going to succeed the rest of their career and you already missed. But based on what we've seen, both fantasy points wise, but also on the field, because like if we see someone on the field and the points aren't there yet, I think they can be considered a hit too. So enough talking. Let's go through it. I think 101's pretty easy, John. Brees Hall, certainly a hit for Will Tam.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was kind of the consensus 101 going into the rookie draft. I don't think much has changed 5 games into the season. I know early on with the first couple games for the Jets, Michael Carter was kind of the de facto starter and they were splitting closer to 50-50. But I mean, yeah, 5 games in and Hall's already kind of overtaken that backfield and he's coming off a 200-yard game where he could have had potentially 3 touchdowns. And he looks electric out there. Uh, catching the ball, doing all the things you want from a true workhorse back.
I know it's already been mentioned. I think the fantasy footballers had on their Twitter like already potentially making a case for RB1 in dynasty leagues just based on his age and his production profile so far. I mean, if it's not Brees Hall, it's Jonathan Taylor. I don't think it's Christian McCaffrey anymore at his age or Saquon Barkley. So I think you're looking at Brees Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and prior. I'm sorry, Edwin, but Javonte Williams was up there before. I don't think he is anymore after the injury. So Brees Hall has really skyrocketed up the dynasty rankings for running back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tam has to be feeling great about that pick at this point. I know the true workhorse backs are pretty few and far between with the current landscape of the NFL. So anytime you can lock in one of those guys, to your point, that young, that's a home run.
Yeah, totally agreed. Well, I think that's how the draft looked at the time, and it's still looking now. So you already have a hit. With the second pick, Travers here came in with the trade from Jim and drafted Kenneth Walker. I think this one's going to be a little interesting because Rashad Penny just got hurt. So our opinion of this being a hit or not might be different in a few weeks, John. But I want to kick it over to you because you mentioned in our prep that you think some of hits or misses also depends on who you passed on.
Right. I like to, feel like I have 2 main buckets for what I'd consider a miss. One is just players that look like a bust and can't cut it in the NFL. The other would be, players that look solid, but were taken ahead of players that look like true studs and are going to be really good for a long time. So Walker's, to me, is pretty challenging in that regard. I think he does look good. The Penny injury did change things pretty rapidly. I mean, I would still, I guess, begrudgingly call him a hit. I would, full disclosure, I would not have taken him at the 102, even though I did have him as my number 2 back in the class, which is certainly not a hot take. But with a small sample size, he does look good. I know kind of the receiving work is the main question with him. I know with the small sample we do have, it seems like he should at least be more involved in that regard than Penny has been. So again, I'll begrudgingly give Walker the hit. Having said that, I would prefer some of the receivers that were taken after him personally.
I agree. I like the receivers after, even now, seeing what Kenneth Walker could be with the starting job. But you look at his production this season, Penny gets hurt, and then he immediately has a point total in standard and PPR over like near 15 points. So at 21 years old, workhorse back with the Seahawks, Penny doesn't have any more time on his contract. I think we're forced to call Kenneth Walker a hit, whereas before this weekend, I don't think I would have either.
Yep, totally agreed with that.
So we're 2 hits so far, and then we're up here. I think the next 2 we won't spend a ton of time on, John. I know we want to talk about our picks, but you drafted Drake London. I drafted Garrett Wilson. I think I'll introduce it by saying while the fantasy numbers for both London and Wilson may have been up and down so far, Matt Harmon of Reception Perception does his charting, and he's doing it in season this year. And though his charting is basically looking at the route success rates without looking at quarterback play to say how many plays they win on their route. And like London and Wilson are both already putting up star level like success rates as route runners. So to me, these are future stars in the league, at the very least, potential superstars at the receiver position. So for me, I think London and Garrett Wilson are both clear hits already in the draft.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I know I was doing some reading leading up to the rookie draft. That's basically top 10 real life uh, receivers drafted top 10 in the real NFL draft have a pretty high hit rate in these dynasty rookie drafts. And these two seem like no exception so far. Both just watching the game really pop off the screen. I know London had some concerns about N'Keal Harry comps and can't separate, but that seems, like it's in the rearview mirror and he looks electric out there. And same with Wilson. I know there were some concerns maybe about it being a crowded offense. And I guess with both guys, it can be at the detriment to some of our other dynasty players with Pitts and
Yeah.
Elijah, where they're siphoning off some target share from those guys. But nonetheless, these two guys, yeah, look dynamic and like they're going to be stars for years to come.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in the interest of time, I don't think we're going to spend a lot more on them. I do think if I were to go back and draft today, Hall's the one, London and Wilson go after that to me. And then if you start to get receiver hungry, I think I go Olave after that. And then I start to think Kenneth Walker. But I do agree. Like, let's keep Kenneth Walker as a hit. And this is a theme I think we might see some years, especially early in their careers. The early first round picks are so valuable, those lottery picks. And we just went through the top four. They all look like hits already. Like, that's where the highest percentage is going to be in your rookie draft. As you get to the back end of the first round and into round two, it's probably going to get a lot lighter. And we're going to do that now. But before we do, we hit our first incomplete. And John, I think it might be the only incomplete of the draft. We'll debate when we get into, rounds 2 and 3. But I'm saying incomplete on Jamison Williams because we have no new information today than we had at draft day, which was early June. So like Tam's selection really doesn't change here with Jamison Williams. We haven't learned a thing. So to me, I think we have to respectfully remove him from the sample size because he hasn't touched the field. He hasn't even practiced yet. We just know absolutely nothing about him as an NFL player.
Yeah, completely agreed. The only thing I have are my priors, which I don't need to, I guess, share. Like, I think he's going to be good, but to Brandon's point, he hasn't seen the field yet, so we can't make any conclusions about him to this point.
Agreed. So keep that in mind. We'll keep him because we're, I guess I'm an accountant, but we're going with the easy math. We're still going to divide by 10 to give you a percentage of first round hit. Keep in mind that that number will be even higher if you remove Jamison Williams from the denominator. And I really hope I got that right there, because that would be embarrassing. Uh, moving on here, and I think we hit our first miss of the first round. And again, I don't want to body Mark too hard. I'm very critical of Mark on the podcast, just kind of our relationship. We like to go back and forth, but um, I think with this draft pick with Treylon Burks, Burks over Olave is a tough pill to swallow right now with how they're succeeding at the NFL level. Matt Harmon has highlighted that part of it is Burks is playing the X receiver, pure outside receiver role. In college, he played like a slot manufactured touches role. So he's learning a completely new position. He's hurt on IR. So I think it's going to be a slow start for Burks, but I don't think his career is like necessarily lost already. At the same time, I think we have to call him a miss this 5 games in here in the first round.
Yep, no, I'm with you on that. Like, to your point, I think it's good to distinguish between a miss and a bust because, again, yeah, it's 5 games into all these guys' careers, so we can't really definitively say anyone's a bust at this point. But like you said, looking at where Burks went versus some of the other players like Olave and some of the second rounders we'll get into, I'm sure Mark would probably like that one back at this point. And just the information we do have, like to your point, Burks didn't traditionally play like a traditional receiver role in college. And then throughout the off season, he had all of these kind of weird conditioning concerns. And then it seemed like
Yeah.
he may or may not have been in the doghouse with Vrabel for a stretch during the off season. And then he was kind of eased into things. And now he's dealing with injuries, which for rookies, any sort of derailment or missed games can be pretty detrimental for the growth of a young player moving forward. So compared to where some of these other guys like London, Wilson, and Olave are, um, I would certainly call Burks a miss as well in that context.
Yeah, I think unfortunately at this time, I know I had him in redraft actually, and I was hopeful around this game right here, the Las Vegas game. He gets 69% of snaps and then only 2 targets. That was a little disappointing after he was getting a good amount of targets per snap, or target per route run in the first 2 games of the season. Again, not a loss. He's learning a new position. I think it was always going to be a slow go for Treylon Burks, but I do think a miss to Chris Olave. And Olave here, who I think of everyone outside of Brees Hall, has been the most productive rookie from a fantasy perspective. He's got the last 3 weeks over 10 fantasy points. In fact, over 15 in PPR. And he's just been really consistent, playing a bunch of snaps, earning targets everywhere. Last week, he did this only playing half the snaps because he had a concussion at the end of the week. But I think from our scouting, and especially I know you also follow Matt Harmon a lot, and he does a great job of the rookies coming in. Olave was the best route runner and NFL ready receiver coming in this season. So the fact that he's been the most productive early on hasn't exactly been a surprise. What has surprised me, John, was I had a prior going in of this guy's not physically imposing. He's 6'1, 190. He's not that X receiver build. But what surprised me is that I think he has performed as a receiver one for a team already as a rookie. And I think his ceiling is even higher than I thought initially on draft day.
Yep, for sure. I did take a few notes in terms of at least some receiving yardage stats. And I know Olave's been kind of the air yards king so far. He had that crazy like 350 air yard game or whatever. And if you look at the actual receiving yards, London and Wilson are around between 250 and 300. Olave has 389 receiving yards. So he's kind of lapping the field right now. And about the stuff leading up to the draft, I found this really interesting because he seemed like the one player where there was a pretty big disconnect between what I would call kind of the college scouting uh, guys and then the fantasy or dynasty football guys, where people more on the scouting side of things loved Olave, seemed like he was their number one or number two receiver potentially in this class, whereas the fantasy community was a little more down on him, whether it's what is like the late declare age, or he didn't have the yak ability, or he wasn't seen as much of a yak threat compared to some of these other guys, and that dinged him and moved him down boards a little bit. But when you see him on the field again, he's getting a ton of separation and just looks the part, and he's been really good so far.
Yeah, totally agreed. So we have another hit here of the first 7 picks. I believe we said 5 hits and an incomplete and a miss with Treylon Burks so far. Am I tracking that correctly, John?
Yep, that's correct from my end.
So we
And
get
yes, to your point again, it really highlights, at least in year one, how important those top picks are in the lottery picks, how valuable those can be in terms of really hitting those high end elite talents.
Oh, for sure. And it's important to know every draft is a little different. This is super flex, and you've pointed out to me before, John, not to steal some draft strategies and broadcast them for you, but some drafts like this coming draft where there are more quarterbacks might push more position players down. But when you see that like there wasn't, like high touted quarterbacks in this draft, a lot of the top position players went in a row here at the beginning. And on draft day, I think you and I both had the top 7 as a top tier here. So whatever order it went in, this was the top tier that we've already reviewed here.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely my top seven going into the rookie draft. And I think Jimmy was on record as saying that our draft went pretty chalky, which, you know, say what you will, but I think for the most part, players went where we expected they would.
Yeah. Well, we get here to the back of the first round, and I want to say again, I always caveat because I don't want anyone to be upset, but it's early. You're not calling anyone's career over, but I also have to say the back end here was a very difficult spot to draft in because from the eighth pick here through the fifth pick of the second round where George Pickens went, I felt like all these players were in a similar tier. And I think we felt that way on draft day too, John. And it's played out that way since draft day. So, I think it's really tough when, you're Edwin here and the your first round pick is the start of a tier that, goes through the mid second round. It's really tough because you could second guess yourself on a guy like George Pickens, but like, I mean, that's of eight players. Like someone's going to be better than the guy you pick, just percentage wise.
Yeah, for sure. I know you were telling me after the draft you felt like Olave was your easiest pick because he was kind
Yeah,
of the end of the tier. So conversely, if you're picking at the start of the next tier, then it's definitely going to be more challenging to potentially parse apart, who's going to be a real hit.
absolutely. And so to start here, I think unfortunately we have to say a miss on Sky Moore. A little disappointing he hasn't earned more playing time in that Kansas City offense. And for me, it's more than just not earning the playing time. It's also the fact that he hasn't looked great with the playing time to me either. When I watch him on the field, he looked rather ordinary. I don't see extreme explosion. And it's early. Like I said, like this could completely change. Matt Harmon hasn't done any sort of like analysis. So like this is me just watching the TV copy. But you look here, his snap count is on the rise. It went from 28 to 35%. It was his high mark last night, but that was only three targets, two receptions, and 15 yards. Maybe it gets better as the season goes on. I think that's the hope. But for a first round pick compared to the other players who went and some of the second rounders, I think it's probably a pick that if Edwin could redo it today, he would.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, it's tough to evaluate because he just hasn't seen the field, which I don't know if that's a you know, big red flag or if it's just more of a philosophy from Andy Reid. But I mean, he's not exactly going up against, electric players like Tyreek Hill or anything. It's MVS, Mecole Hardman, Juju, who hasn't exactly been lighting the world on fire this season either.
Yeah,
Uh, and I haven't watched too much all 22 tape or anything like that. So I admittedly haven't seen much of his tape this year. Um, but again, just him not seeing the field is a bit of a concern. And it makes you, or at least it makes me think about the NFL draft. And he went after some guys in the second round, like John Mechie, Alec Pierce, George Pickens, Tyquan Thornton. There were a bunch of receiver needy teams who did pass on him. So it does kind of make me wonder if there were reasons for that. I know he was a hot name coming into the rookie draft, and
yeah.
all of us fantasy managers were wondering, like, what the heck? How is everyone passing on this guy? But maybe the teams know more than we do, as is often the case.
I think this is a good time that we're gonna skip Kenny Pickett and jump right to James Cook. Unfortunately, so far, I would consider this a miss as well. But I want to highlight James Cook because this was a player taken at the end of the second round. You looked at the NFL draft, and it was really Brees Hall and Kenneth Walker, at least draft capital wise, were the clear top two backs. And then Cook was in a tier with like Rashad White, etc. And I think Cook and Sky Moore are similar in that these are players that went a little bit later in the draft. They still had solid draft capital, but they were taken higher than players with better draft capital in the rookie draft because of their landing spots, Buffalo and Kansas City. And at least early in the season, it's looking like maybe opportunity was prioritized a little too heavily here at the end of the first round. And again, not even a criticism to John or Edwin. This could have been any of us, and I think we all had these guys on our radar here at that point in the draft.
Yep. Yeah, I think where Cook went here at the 110 was pretty in line with consensus. So yeah, I'm not gonna rip into John for the pick or anything. That is a good point about going with opportunity over draft capital and some of the different considerations we're weighing when we're making these picks. Um, as you alluded to, I'd also consider Cook a miss. I think he's going to be a productive player. I think he's looked pretty good with the minimal work he's gotten so far. Um, and we know he's, can be a pretty big role in the receiving game, which is important for some of these running backs in a half PPR format. But just looking at some of the guys who went after him, there's another running back who's certainly outperforming Cook that we'll get to in a few picks.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just looking at some of the players that went after Cook, I'm sure John would rather have some of those guys in hindsight.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think what's frustrating if you're John is that part of the part of the allure of James Cook at the time, and I think I said when he picked him in our initial draft review of, hey, he's getting like a weekly flex play. I think we all looked at it and we're like, well, Buffalo really pursued JD McKissick. They really want that pass game back, and they don't believe in Devin Singletary. And then as the season has gone on, it's like, what the heck? You prioritize this, but James Cook isn't seeing the field. And I don't know if he's still being punished for that week one fumble. I would doubt it, but and maybe like they want that pass catching role, but it's not as valuable because Josh Allen runs so much, So I don't know what it is, but he's really the third running back in line, and he's not getting the pass game activity that we thought he would. So an early miss at the 110, I would say.
Yeah, completely agreed. He's just not getting the opportunity we thought he might. Like, I know we kind of thought um, Zach Moss would be nothing in that offense. I admittedly haven't seen the percentages from recent weeks, but I know at least early in the season it was kind of a three-way committee. And to your point, Allen's stealing some of the rush work and just spreading it a lot in the passing game too. So just
Interest Interesting, John. In my head, I was just thinking like you brought up the point, these guys were drafted for their opportunity and their landing spot. And then what are we talking about here? We're talking they haven't gotten the opportunity. They haven't, it's weird that like they were perceived this way because of the opportunities they were in, yet the issue 5 weeks in is they're not hitting the field.
yep, for sure.
We get to Kenny Pickett, and I think Pickett is a similar conversation to Ken Walker, especially in a super flex format. I don't know, John, whether I want to call it a hit or not. I feel like if you call it a hit, it really skews the percentages, but getting a young starting quarterback who's already playing by week 5, and in fact got in at week 4 on a super flex format, is incredibly valuable, and he's on a really good offense. So this is tough. I kind of consider Ken Walker and Kenny Pickett soft hits, if that makes sense. Like if we're going level of hits, I think Hall, London, Wilson, and Olave are really good hits. And then I look at Pickett and Ken Walker, like you got good pieces. They could show a little bit more through the rest of the season, but I don't think they're quite on the level as those top 4.
Yeah, quarterback's just so hard to, I guess, definitively uh, proclaim something one way or the other 5 games into their career. Since, as we've seen with a lot of quarterbacks, it can take 2, 3 years before they really hit their stride and kind of establish themselves as the players that they're drafted to be. I would personally consider Pickett a hit. I think the fact that just getting drafted to the Steelers, like I'm kind of a Tomlin believer personally. That team, I was feel like I used to be harder on him, but the fact that team's been so consistent, I think kind of have to trust what he's doing there. And as you just said, that offense is pretty loaded with receiving talent with Deontay Johnson, George Pickens now, Chase Claypool. Like I feel like Pickett's pretty. Or I know the O line's a concern right now, but hopefully that's something the Steelers will address in the upcoming draft, and they can continue to build around Pickett. And I think just the fact he's getting the chance to start 4 games into his career and the team is putting faith in him over. I know Trubisky kind of face planted, but putting faith in him over some more established veterans kind of speaks volumes.
Yeah. Well, let's do this, John. We'll provide a range here, and I think the fair range is 4 for sure hits so far, potentially 6 if you include Pickett and Walker. So if you're analyzing this, and again, I know the math minus Jamison Williams. So let's just say you're ranging between 40 to 60, 65%. I would say, like, is where you're looking at the hit range so far. And the further you get out from the rookie draft, I feel like the more we're going to feel like these guys aren't hits than we are going to feel like more guys are hits, if that makes sense. Not saying that like the guys we've written off are definitely going to be bad. I just feel like we probably feel better about certain guys than we're going to feel in the future versus the other direction.
Yep, for sure. Like since we're these guys are all rookies, are always kind of looking at them through rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
Some of them, probably will settle into, top 12 at their position years out, which is great. While others, while they'll still be good, will be more, in the receiver 3 or running back 3 range, realistically.
Well, I know like you have London, I have Wilson and Olave. We're looking and we have Justin Jefferson right now. Like that's what you're
Exactly.
hoping when you're the owner, but like years down the line, it's like, oh no, like I have Deontay Johnson or like
Yeah.
not even taking a shot at the guy, but like I feel like over time you start to feel a little bit differently about these guys.
Yeah, everyone, when you have someone showing promise, you immediately jump to like, oh yeah, they're the best running back or receiver in the league. When realistically, they're going to fall somewhere between they could be a receiver 1 or a receiver 3,
Mm-hmm.
2, 3 years out from now. So,
So a couple observations I want to make is like if you're trading for a first round pick, which is kind of like the idea of this podcast too, 5 weeks in, you're looking at 40 to 60% success rate, with the vast majority of it coming in the first half of the first round. Like this first half of the first round here is all hits or incomplete. Back half, it's really what Olave and Pickett, so I think that's what you're looking at. Like you really want to get in the first half of the first round to have a hit in the first round or have a high percentage. And I know going in, we just kind of like from doing some reading, you and I threw out 50% is probably what the first round is going to end up settling at in a given dynasty league over like a long period of years.
yeah, I feel like just kind of reading up on you know, high level, like how dynasty rookie drafts go. Yeah, I've read that 50% seems to generally be the hit rate for the first round. And based on what we're seeing here, it seems to be the case for our league in year 1.
Yep, that certainly seems where we're landing. And I do want to say too, like, caution to the wind of making assumptions about a draft like early on. And this is not I know Jimmy's sitting there with a smirk on his face and thinks I'm throwing, cold water on Ben's draft picks, but I know the main consensus on draft Twitter, not even like just people in our league, was that 2023 is a much better draft than 2022. I would say, compared to a lot of years, like everyone's like, this is a weak year. This is a weak year. We didn't have Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Brees Hall last year. I think this rookie class is really like stronger than it was looking back in April, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of my kind of point. I'm glad you brought it up because, yeah, I feel like there has been some talk with owners in our league and more on draft Twitter to your point that the 22 class was seen as pretty weak going in. And the receiving group, especially, seems pretty deep. And again, like some of these guys will maybe fall a little bit in terms of overall rankings as we go forward year over year. But all of the kind of for most of the first rounders in the NFL draft are all looking really promising so far. Seems like a deep receiving core. And while the running back group doesn't necessarily seem as deep, having a guy like Brees Hall, who seems like a good bet to be a top 5, potentially top 1 dynasty running back, to your point, moving forward is, speaks to the strength of this class.
Without a doubt. Well, we have about 4 minutes left on the free stream. So I think it makes sense for part one to be the first round. Don't fear anyone thinking we're getting a three-part podcast because, spoiler alert, round two, three, we're not going to talk on a lot of the misses. Maybe a quick one-liner about a player. So it's going to go much faster. So John and I are going to take a quick break here. And we will post part two coming up. So hang on here and look on your YouTube screen for part two. We'll be right back here on the podcast.